Hello, hi. Welcome back to our series on the latest changes to the selective test based on the sample paper that was released a bit earlier in the week. Hopefully you've watched our other videos and realized that most sections aren't necessarily a big deviation or a huge change from the skills that we've been teaching the students, especially in our selective trial test classes. In the case of writing especially, it is actually quite reassuring that the skills that we've taught before are still relevant to the students now. We actually believe that some students will be advantaged by the fact that this is technically a bit more standardized than what used to occur in the past. What I'm trying to say is, a stimulus such as a bicycle with square wheels or the word mistake. These are very abstract stimuli. The better students tended to be the ones that were able to focus on, something of a figurative concept and still tie that in well with the stimulus that was at hand, whereas this is inherently much more objective, right? An advice sheet is a fairly standardized list of different things that would make students feel a bit more comfortable or feel more enthusiastic in the school environment, and that just lends itself to having a very clear structure in which to approach it, and that's hopefully what we'll get out of today. The text type itself, I'm sure, will catch some students unaware because historically we've always encouraged that students stick to either the creative genre or the persuasive text type. However, like I said, the concepts themselves aren't a huge change from what the students will need for now compared to what they needed in the past. So today, let's just also talk about how this particular advice sheet concept is actually just a rehashed way of writing the persuasive, but also bearing in mind things such as people's emotions and how to allow students to get on well in the school area itself. Okay, so what we have here is, of course, the writing stimulus itself. I want to take just quick second to show you the instructions that they have listed out earlier. So it says here the question paper contains one writing task, again, same as it has always been. The task provides an opportunity for you to show how well you can select, develop, and organize ideas, right? So key here being organization of ideas, in other words, having a clear structure towards the writing task itself, and communicate them effectively in writing. So this is basically the section that encourages creativity of responses, incorporating a variety of vocabulary, creative writing techniques, and so on and so forth. It says, before you begin writing, take time to think carefully about what you need to say and the ways in which the organization and layout might help express your message. And this is actually a very key point to take note of. We always encourage students to spend an adequate amount of time in preparing their response. It's like the old saying goes, if you have 3 hours to chop down a tree, you want to spend 2 hours sharpening the axe, because that's what makes that final 1 hour of writing, or chopping down the tree, so to speak, much more productive and much more efficient. So taking note of the fact that it says the writing task itself is now 30 minutes, where it used to be 20 minutes, does give us a little bit more time to plan out a coherent response. And of course, I suppose you would encourage students to write a bit more than they previously would have done. In the past, especially in the context of a persuasive, we may have given them one introduction, 2 body paragraphs, and of course the conclusion itself, as that was all that could fit into the 20 minutes time span. Now that they have 30 minutes, the structure is subject to a little bit of change. So I'll just briefly explain the persuasive structure that we used to teach the students before, and then we'll have a look at the stimulus and see how that is actually relevant. Okay, so the persuasive structure that we normally have been teaching to our students is fairly simple. You start off with the introduction itself. This is where you want to state your point of view. What is your perspective? What is your side of the argument, where there is one? Make it very clear what your perspective is in the first sentence. Then you basically want to introduce your arguments themselves. So in the next sentence, you would have your first argument or first perspective or viewpoint, or I suppose anything to further your thesis, your opinion. And the second one is your argument number 2. Or the third sentence, I should say. And then the very last one is something called a context sentence. This is definitely not something that is absolutely essential for every piece to have. The more advanced students, the more mature pieces will have something as a 4th sentence to kind of wrap up the introduction. The reason that we call it a context sentence, as the name implies, is to contextualize the issue within either what's happening in society or within what's relevant to the reader, what's relevant to the writer. But that's another way of basically wrapping up the introduction itself. Then in your body paragraphs, given that historically we would have a 20-minute writing piece, we generally recommended 2 body paragraphs because there wasn't much time to expand on 3 different ideas. So stick to 2 and do them very well. And then we have a conclusion. Now, of course, there are different structures for these body paragraphs, and other students use things such as Oreo and Appeal, and there's lots of different acronyms or mnemonics, I should say, for how you should structure your body paragraph. I'm not going to go into that in too much detail here because it's not quite relevant to this particular stimulus that's found in the sample paper. But essentially, in the body paragraphs, that's your chance to really elaborate on the arguments themselves, not in the introduction. The introduction, as the name implies, is just a quick intro to the idea of itself. You just want to tell them what is your argument and how it pertains to the question or the stimulus itself. So, for example, you might say something like, if the topic was indoor games or computer games are better than playing outside, or playing outside is better than playing indoors or playing computer games, then I would state my point of view immediately, which is that I strongly believe that playing outdoors is much better than playing computer games. I'm not using very complex language here, but it's just the gist of it. So the point of view is that playing outside is better than playing computer games. First argument is that playing outside is good for your general fitness and general health. Second argument is that playing outdoors most of the times involves playing with other children, which fosters other skills such as social skills and teamwork. The context sentence would be something like, in an age where we have an increasing access to technology and become more and more dependent on technology for different aspects, including entertainment, it is highly relevant and pertinent that students should be encouraged to play outside rather than indoors. So just a way of contextualizing the argument as a whole. Then you get into the body paragraphs where, this one I really want to expand on all the benefits that playing outdoors has to offer in terms of general health, physical health. So maybe it's not as strenuous on your eyesight, it encourages physical activity, and is just in general better for children in terms of their physical health. And then body paragraph 2 is about the different social skills and different things they learn from playing outdoors rather than on devices. Your conclusion doesn't need to be very elaborate. It is something that you need to have, but you don't have to spend too much time and detail on it. In general, we say that most texts, especially like newspaper articles, are organized into this funnel structure where you put all the most important things at the top, and then as you get to the bottom and people's attention spans start to dwindle, you have less and less important things. So in that sense, the introduction really does set the pace and the steed for the rest of the passage itself, the rest of the writing piece. Of course, both your body paragraphs are important in that forms the meat of your matter, and then the conclusion is something that you just want to have for the sake of having, but you don't necessarily need to expend a lot of effort on it. So at this stage, you may be wondering how these conventions of the persuasive text type actually relate to this particular topic. And I know persuasive seems quite different to the concept of an advice sheet. So let's actually try and dissect this stimulus in a bit more detail to understand how what the students already know can still be applied to these stimuli that might seem a bit left field. So new to the area is the first thing to take note of. And this, of course, is the theme, the main concept. Themes are important to understand as they guide the emotions of people and they guide the real focus that you want to have over here in this particular text. We'll come back to that in some time. 3 new students have just arrived in your local area. Your teacher has asked you to write an advice sheet for them, making them feel enthusiastic about coming to your school. Now, the concept of feeling enthusiastic, again, really belies that we are looking at something of a disguised persuasive. If you're trying to make someone feel enthusiastic, then of course, you're trying to influence their feelings and emotions by listing just one side of the argument, just as a persuasive would, in this case, the benefits of coming to your school. Write an advice sheet for the new students about how to get on well in your school. Now, to me, get on well basically implies how to make them feel more comfortable in this school environment, right? How do you make them feel comfortable and how do you make them feel enthusiastic about joining this new school? Now, remember before we said that persuasive would basically start with an introduction, then we would have your body paragraphs or your arguments, 1, 2, and 3, and then finally you have a conclusion just to summarize and wrap up everything that you've said before. This course structure is essentially what we're going to try and retain. Now, remember, structure basically gives you confidence. When you have something to fall back on, that's the first thing that you would begin with. So in this situation, what kinds of things would we say in our introduction if what we're trying to do is write an advice sheet for them? You would say something along the lines of, hello, we welcome you to our school with open arms. Again, this is just a more unique and creative way of just simply saying welcome or welcome to our school. And we welcome you to our school with open arms as a sign of the warmth that we're trying to convey here in the very beginning itself. Then remember, as we said before, an introductory structure would basically have the point of view, which we've already stated. There's no agenda here. We're just simply inviting them. And then you want to talk about the benefits that the school offers, because the crux of this, the main focus here is that you want the students to feel enthusiastic. So the first thing would be something along the lines of our institute is world-renowned, bit of exaggeration here, world-renowned as one of the most academically accomplished schools, and we are certain that you would flourish, not just thrive, but flourish in this enriching environment. So here we have basically introduced our first argument, or our first point of showing off the benefits of the school, which is that it is academically very rigorous. The next thing that we're going to go into is, of course, the second argument or the second idea. That may be something about, not so focused on academics, which might actually stress out some students, but something more to do with perhaps the school environment in terms of the social environment of the school. So the social environment would be something like with an extremely diverse and friendly cohort, you can look forward to fitting in from day one, right? From day one, again, just emphasizes the fact that they will feel comfortable as soon as they begin. And of course, this also at the same time makes them feel enthusiastic about the fact that it's a diverse cohort. It's something that brings, lots of different people with different interests together. And on that note, just in the interest of having a nice, clear flow of ideas, the next thing that you can do in terms of the students looking forward to a diverse cohort is offering the extracurricular opportunities that the school may provide. Now, bear in mind that the three ideas are just things that I have personally come up with, but if you as a student can come up with something that's more unique, or some other ideas that you really feel like you can elaborate on in the body paragraphs, then by all means go for those. So as I said, the next thing I was going to go into was the extracurricular activities. So something along the lines of a rhetorical question. What are your hobbies? What are your hobbies or interests? What are your hobbies or interests? Rhetorical question. Again, you want to try and introduce a variety of literary techniques. You might want to just mention some of the different things that the school has. So let's say swimming. Actually, sorry, small correction there. So after that, you might basically want to try and introduce the different activities that the school has, but not at the risk of making something of a list, because that's something you would leave towards your actual body paragraphs. So just something simple along the lines of, no matter what your interests, no matter where your interests lie, we will certainly be able to nurture your talents through a myriad of extracurricular opportunities. A myriad of extracurricular opportunities. So again, we have basically tried to emphasize the first, the second, and the third arguments in this situation, the three benefits that the school has to offer. And then before I was talking about the concept of a context sentence. So in a persuasive, the context sentence, as the name implies, contextualizes the issue. So if it's something like a social issue we're talking about, then you can talk about how it's become more prevalent in recent times, or how it is particularly relevant to the reader. In this situation, the context sentence is not quite necessary in the same way. It's perhaps better to have something that basically wraps up the concept that we're trying to cover here, which of course comes back to the idea that this is an advice sheet and comes back to the theme that the students are new to the area. If you can link back to the fact that this is the theme here, then that would basically score you some extra brownie points. So how can we link back to this concept of being new to the area? And the answer, of course, is in empathy, right? You want to empathize with the fact that these students are new to the area, and that can often be a very confusing or daunting or challenging time. So do address that fact. We completely understand that moving areas is an often daunting change, again, daunting rather than, just it's often a big deal, or it's often a big change, right? It's often an often daunting change. But we are certain that very soon you will come to share our gusto, our enthusiasm for our caring and supportive environment. In other words, you're basically trying to, again, encourage, now this time the roles are reversed, so you empathize with them, and you're basically trying to encourage them to empathize with you. In other words, you try to relate to your enthusiasm for the school. That's how you foster enthusiasm in other people. You will come to share our gusto for our caring and supportive environment as we, and then you want something like nice and punchy, a nice way, like a subtle touch, a very nice way of ending this introduction, as we guide you on your learning journey. No ellipses, sorry, learning journey, full stop. And that is essentially the introduction. Now, I'm not going to go into the specifics of what you want to have in the body paragraphs themselves. The introduction oftentimes really sets the pace and sets the steed for the rest of your writing piece. We always say that any writing piece, including newspaper articles especially, but really anything follows this, this funnel structure, this upside down pyramid structure, where you basically have your most important things right up here at the top. And then as readers' attentions dwindle further towards the bottom, you have the least important things there. Now, granted that a conclusion is something that's necessary to have, but it doesn't mean that you need to spend a lot of time or a lot of effort in making the best possible conclusion that you put in there, as long as there is something over here, because at this point, what you say doesn't matter as much as what you say at the very beginning, the introduction itself. Once you have the introduction, that basically is like a recipe for the rest of your writing piece. So you've stated what your three arguments are, and then in the body paragraphs, you're going to just elaborate and expand on them. So in our case, the arguments that we had, of course, was the academics of the school. It's a very academically reputable institute, academics. You have, of course, the hobbies, right, and the friendly environment. Right? So academics, sorry, I think the second one was that people are very friendly and warm and welcoming, and then the hobbies. So because these are the three main ideas that you're going to focus on, you basically just want to elaborate on different aspects of this. So in the case of academics, you could talk about the reputation, right? Perhaps it ranks very highly. You could talk about things like the teachers themselves. So perhaps, the school has teachers that not only are very good in terms of knowing the content, but they're very good at expressing it and teaching you. Perhaps they're very friendly, they're very approachable. You always feel like you can ask them questions, and they really go out of their way to try and help you. That's what makes a good academic institution. So perhaps you want to focus on the teachers. You could talk about different academic opportunities. So yes, we did talk about extracurriculars later on. Right, but surely you can find different academic opportunities, such as if there's a certain language, do you get to visit the country? If we're talking about different excursions to things that might be very interesting, so perhaps excursions to museums or like scientific excursions and things like that. Then in terms of the friendly learning environment, then of course you want to express about the people, how they're very diverse, right? We're very multicultural, so that lots of different people can fit in. You might want to express the ideas of how, perhaps during lunchtime, it's basically everyone gets together and plays together, which is very different. There are no groups that get formed, and people are very welcoming of different students. You might want to also discuss things like, if your school has a buddy system so that they can, transition to the school environment much better. That would also be something to focus on. And then, of course, in terms of the hobbies, remember at the beginning we said that the introduction is not where you want to list out all the different opportunities and extracurriculars that the school has to offer. This more so comes in the body paragraph itself. So again, you just want to expand and elaborate on the different opportunities that students can have. Even if they don't quite know exactly what they're after, we give them different opportunities so that they can decide on that later on. So all of these different aspects will go into your body paragraphs themselves. I guess, like I said, there are different ways that different structures that you can have within this body paragraph. But the most important thing is, number one, you do touch on a variety of different things, and you don't want to focus too much on just one thing. You do want to have some concrete examples, right? Examples basically move things away from just abstract realm. So you could say something like, oh, academic-wise, our school's very good, it's very good. But unless you have concrete examples of what about it is good, then you're not doing a very good job of expressing the specifics. So you want to have concrete examples there. And then other things, of course, to be wary of is things like, use of vocab, right? So your creative expression. So make sure you express things in a variety of different ways. You have advanced vocab. You start to incorporate different techniques as appropriate. So you don't want to have, an excessive amounts of vocab or techniques just for the sake of putting it in, but just as it's appropriate. You can do things such as varying your sentence structure, right, as well as the sentence length, so that it makes for a much more interesting rather than repetitive read. All of these different elements that we have been teaching before, as I mentioned initially, are still relevant to this particular writing piece. It's just that we've had to adapt and tweak what we already know. In terms of potentials for other different text types, of course, they could give you something like a recount, discuss some major event that's happened in your life, and that's really a rehash of a creative. Yes, you can draw from your experiences, or you can try and think about something that ultimately teaches a certain lesson, right? It's about the journey and what you got out of it, so you could have something along those lines. In this case, of course, it is an advice sheet. An advice sheet is, as we said, something of a rehashed persuasive, and bear in mind that all of these things, regardless of what text type you get, the things that you do want to focus on especially is people's emotions. So you want to understand how people are likely to feel, and then how you can address their feelings through different ways. I hope that gives you some sort of idea of basically how to approach this seemingly new text type, some concept of an advice sheet. But the reality of it is, as I mentioned multiple times, is that you can have a concrete structure that you've come up with for other texts and adapt that to this particular text type, as long as you're wary of the things that ultimately make a good piece of writing, including being aware of the structure of it, the variety of expression, and creative devices and literary devices that you can use to express yourself in a much more interesting way, so that the reader themselves are able to understand that you are not just another writer, you're more unique, you're more mature, and that you have quite interesting ideas. If you wanted some more information about these specific concepts, do have a look at our other videos. We have a number of different seminars that basically address different strategies towards writing, different those creative techniques that you can use. So do have a look at our YouTube channel and see all the things that we have. If you have any other questions at all about the specifics of today's seminar on writing, don't hesitate to reach out.